Hello, and as I've said, welcome. It's wonderful to have so many of you here today. So today's webinar is about preparing your students for the Cambridge English reading exams. So my name's Donia Estafanos, and I'm joined today by Chris Thorne, who will be presenting the webinar. Hi, Chris.
Hello. Hi, Donia.
So Chris is an online teacher educator and an ELT writer, and he's previously lived and taught in North Africa, Europe, Asia, and Australia. Some of his recent projects have involved setting up and establishing a global online teacher community, online teacher development programs in the occupied Palestinian territories, and also Japan. And he's also been supporting Cambridge Assessment English and Cambridge University Press as an online materials writer and webinar presenter. So we're absolutely delighted to have him here today to share his expertise with all of us. So due to the current climate, we are delivering this webinar to you in a slightly different way. Like most of you, we are working from home, but we are still aiming to give you the best experience that we can. We are relying on home Wi-Fi, so do bear with us if we have any issues. Okay, so before we get started, here are just a few suggestions to help you get the most out of today's session. We recommend that you wear headphones to get better quality audio and to hear better. And try not to have anything else running, especially Skype. So switch off any other programs that you have if you can. And don't worry if the picture is a little blurry at first. That's just live streaming and it should improve as we go on. So during the webinar, you will be using the chat box on the right of the screen, as lots of you already are. So that's wonderful. Do use the chat box if you want to type any comments or questions. If there are questions that we can answer straight away, we'll type an answer in the chat box directly to you. But we will be keeping some questions for the Q&A session at the end, okay? So don't worry if your question isn't answered straight away. And very importantly, we will be issuing you with a certificate at the end of the webinar. So the certificate, as well as the slides and a link to the recording, will be sent to you after the webinar. Okay, so I think that's it from me, and let's get started. Over to you, Chris.
Thank you, Donia. Thanks for such a lovely introduction, and thank you to all of our viewers who have given up some of your time to all come together today. It's wonderful to see so many people from so many places to all come together and talk about reading skills. And that's the topic of today's session. We're going to be looking at the development of reading skills. We're going to do that by looking at some stages of a reading lesson and trying to pick out some common ideas that you can take and incorporate within your teaching in the classroom and also while planning to teach. Sometimes we will do the activities, so you'll experience them as a learner. Sometimes we'll take a step back and kind of discuss them as you might in the staff room with other teachers. But whichever approach we're taking, please try and take a step back and try and reflect upon activities, analyze them, and think about how you could adapt them to make them work for your learners in your setting. Now, at the end of the session, we'll also look at some free resources for teachers and for learners as well. So there'll be some useful bits for you to take away and incorporate within your teaching as well. Oh, and if you have one to hand, you might want to grab a paper and pen just to scribble down a few ideas as we progress through the session. Now, before we go any further, I thought it would be a really nice idea to find out a little bit more about you. So if you're joining us live, then hopefully a poll should appear on your screen in the next few seconds. All you need to do is to select the statements that best represents your feelings about teaching reading. You can tell us a little bit more about that and expand upon your answer in the chat as well. Now, as we wait for the poll results to come in, let's think a bit about the task itself. Now, polls like this do three important jobs. Firstly, they give educators information about learners. And that helps us to adapt our approach either while teaching, or if we ask these questions before a lesson, it could also inform the planning of lessons. Polls are also a lovely way of directing learners' thinking in certain directions. And having to actively select an option, as you're doing now, if you're participating in this live session, then it might make you consider it a little bit more deeply than you otherwise would have done. Thirdly, polls can provide some really helpful interaction and variety. Oh, I can see the results of the poll are in. Let me have a little look. Oh, now I can see them. I'm not sure if you can all see them, but just to summarize, it looks like the majority of people quite like teaching online, or quite like teaching reading, both online and in the face-to-face classroom. About 25% of people aren't so keen on teaching online. Okay, well, that's really helpful for me to know. And I really hope that wherever you sit within that range, that you'll get a few ideas from this session that will leave you feeling even more positive and sort of confident about teaching reading online in the future. Okay. Now, next, I'd like us to start looking at the beginning of an online lesson that develops reading skills. I'm going to show you some images, and as I show you the image, I'd like you to write the first one or two words that come to mind as you see it. So it could be something you see in the picture, the way it makes you feel, anything at all. Okay, so lots of suggestions. Bright lights, night, fantastic. Okay, solitude, shopping, interesting. So there's lots of people describing emotions, things that you can see, things you feel, maybe things you can smell, maybe talking about the perspective of the character in the picture, maybe talking about what it evokes in you. Okay, great. Let's do the same with another image. I'd love to hear what you think about this. So picture B. Again, you could think about the person or people pictured, the situation, maybe what they're doing, what it makes you feel yourself. Okay. Yeah, Joy. Hungry. Yeah, if you haven't had your lunch, or if you're in between meals, watching people order food can be quite torturous. Okay, let's do the same with the next image. Okay, now people are talking about working, commuting. What are most of the people doing in this image? So I think we can all see they're on a train, maybe on the London Tube, much like the metro in other cities. Maybe they're going to work, coming back. But what are they all doing? Okay, and the next image. What does this make you think of? It's so interesting just seeing the vast variety. That's an awful phrase. Just the huge number of different ways that you're interpreting these images. We can all see the same things, the same pictures, but people are coming up with lots and lots of different ways of interpreting it. So, saying before, some people are talking about what you can literally see, objects in the picture. Others are talking about what the character might be thinking, experiencing. It could be the same for you. There's so many ways these can be interpreted. Someone said Sunday evening. Someone's taken Sunday evening from this picture. Okay, and the final image. Okay, this is picture E. Okay. Oh, I saw someone write scanning there. I think probably describing the previous image. So people are talking a lot about reading. I can see a lot of comments suggesting different reading skills or different ways of reading. It looks like this is maybe a Kindle or similar device. Maybe someone's reading a novel, so perhaps that's more sort of extensive reading. Okay. So we've looked at some different images, 5 different images to be precise. They're all different, but they're also quite alike in some different ways. So next, I'd love for you to tell me in the chat, what might these 5 images all have in common? What unifies these 5 images? Okay, Marianne, yeah, reading, lots of reading, information, discovery. Yep, okay. I think we can all see there's a very obvious connection to do with reading and maybe different types of reading. So we have someone with a menu. Maybe they have something in mind. They're just, you know, maybe she fancies something in particular and is just seeing if that's on the menu. Maybe that's a different kind of reading to somebody who has got a book and is highlighting sections of text. Maybe you're having to read that really quite carefully and trying to extract particular facts or useful little chunks from a more dense text. We have someone in a city also seeing lots of text all over the place, but is, you know, again, maybe reading it, but is sort of being bombarded with it rather than having a text in their hands. We have people on a train looking at newspapers. Perhaps when we're looking at a newspaper, we're not reading everything in it, but we're having a look through, trying to quickly decide whether a certain article is of interest or whether another one might be. And then you have someone reading more extensively. Okay. Now, I think for the last question, I had lots and lots of people saying reading, that's the connection. I'd be very interested to see how you interpret this question. I'd love for you to tell me which of these questions you believe is the odd one out and why it is the odd one out. Again, there is no correct answer. There is no incorrect answer. We've got over 3,000 people in this session at the moment, which is remarkable. But all the same, I think we could all give a different and equally valid response to this. Obviously, we'll choose some of the same ones, but our reasons could be very different. Okay. Now, another quick task. I'd just like to sort of try and personalize this a little bit. Now, I got a lovely little message from my wife on my phone about 30 minutes ago, wishing me good luck in here. And yeah, that made me smile. That put a smile on my face. So the same question to you. I would really like to know something that you have read recently that put a smile on your face, that made you happy. Oh, okay, so I can see a beautiful book about life and cooking. Um, oh, a birthday e-cards. Oh, a compilation of horror stories. A joke. Okay, lots of different things. Now, I asked you that final question for 3 reasons. Firstly, I wanted to learn a little bit more about you and to maybe elicit some memorable examples of reading that I could sort of work into the session a little bit later on. Also, this may sound silly to you, but I thought that that question might make you feel a little bit happier thinking of it. You see, whether we're learning together in the same classroom or in lots of different ones, it's better when the people involved feel good and hopefully have a smile on their face. That comes across. And so I was hoping I would encourage you to do that with that question. Okay, so now we're going to take a step away from our classroom and pop into the staff room to have a little chat about the lesson so far. Okay, so let's think. What was the purpose of that stage? Now, feel free to chuck your ideas, to add your ideas to the chats. I will tell you mine and let's see how well they match up. So my objective was to get you thinking about the topic. Our topic today, in case you weren't sure, is reading. I wanted to activate some of your existing knowledge, some of the associated language, and hopefully to get you interested in exploring it a little bit further. Hopefully by getting you sharing some ideas in this place, it sort of got you warmed up as well and a bit more sort of comfortable communicating with all the other people in our little classroom here with just 3,500 other learners. Okay, now, could this approach be adapted for other lessons? Yes, absolutely. Now, I got all of these pictures from a site called Unsplash. I quite like it. They're free. There are other sites you can use for that as well. You may also have your own course book, which probably has lots of pictures in it. The publishers obviously spent a lot of time and effort trying to pluck out some images all related to a particular topic. So you might find they've already done the work for you. But yes, by using pictures in this way, you can lead into any number of sort of topics or themes. Okay. Okay, question number 3. This is a great question. Would learners with different ability levels be able to participate? Now, I can see that some people are using some very sophisticated, complex language to communicate their ideas in that task. Would you think that would exclude learners with a lower level of language? I think this task is very open. I think that's the beauty of it. It allows people to express simple connections between the images using simple language, or quite sophisticated ideas with more complex language. But the point is whether your learners are a lower level or a much higher one, they could be equally challenged by this task while still being able to successfully complete it. It creates lots of opportunities for people to learn from one another, whether it's words to describe things that they see in the pictures or different ways of drawing connections between those things. Okay. Now, scaffolding. How did I scaffold that activity? And by scaffold, I mean provide the support. What little techniques or decisions did I make along the way that made that task more doable? I think one thing I did was hopefully provided a little bit of thinking time. If, to be honest, if this was in a smaller class, if there weren't quite so many of us, then I would probably give a little more silent thinking time before asking people to respond. I provided some prompts. I suggested sort of areas that you might be able to comment on. You can see lots of other people's ideas in the chat. So perhaps if you have an idea but you can't think of the words to express it, you might be able to get some ideas from your peers in the chat. And finally, context was conveyed without language. It was a very visual task. So you didn't need to read and decode a question in order to participate. Yeah, it was a very accessible task. Okay. Now, there was lots of room for your ideas and your interpretations within activity, and that's why I think it works really well. However, I, as the teacher, selected the images. I controlled what we looked at and when. And this might be appropriate if you have large online classes without safe access to breakout rooms, but there could be some ways that we could adapt this activity to, to make it work in slightly different situations. Again, I'd love for you to add your ideas to the chat. Meanwhile, I'll run through a few suggestions that I have. I'd love to know what you think of them. Okay, so you could put learners in groups of 5. If you have a smaller class, maybe give them a picture each and ask them to describe the picture to the group rather than everyone looking directly at it. Sort of that adds an extra chain and use of language and communication. You could ask learners to bring an image themselves. You could ask them to make connections between the images and their lives by asking them which picture represents them. Again, you could make it more communicative by asking learners, after they've decided which picture is the odd one out and why, ask them to find someone else who had a similar idea and the same reason behind it. You could use it as a prompt later on for learners' own production or creative activities by getting them to develop a narrative, make their own story. Or you could use the pictures to focus on specific ideas or language items. Okay, there are so many suggestions in the chat. They're screaming for us, difficult to keep up. But yeah, I think there's lots of similar ones there. Yeah, asking questions, engaging, yes. Now, these are all things we can do in the live online classroom. However, I think something we need to be careful of when talking about online teaching is exactly what we mean by online teaching. In some situations, it could describe what we're doing now, having a synchronous or a live interaction. You and I, unless, apologies to anyone who's watching a recording of this, but everyone who's engaging in the live webinar and can see the chat down the side, we're having a live interaction. This is synchronous. However, sometimes we might engage with learners and they might engage with learning content asynchronously. And this means that you make learning content available and they can access it and respond to tasks in their own time. So the example you can see on the screen is an asynchronous version of the task we have just done. Learners can access it. That's a Padlet. They can see their task, and then comment under the pictures after they've had a little bit of time to think about it. Now, by allowing students to learn in this way, it gives them possibly a little bit more thinking time. And more thinking time often leads to better, and by better I mean more developed responses. And that can only be a good thing. It might give more students an opportunity to develop a response at all. So it might include more learners. I think another advantage of working with learners in this way is that you could then get them to go away and maybe take a photo of their own or make a picture that would add to the sequence of images. Doing this might involve them taking a break from the screen. And remember, that's a really important part of being an online teacher, providing learners with regular screen breaks. Okay, here's another approach that you can use to lead into a topic. This is a lovely one. It's called a KWL chart. You may well use this in your face-to-face classroom. I know that I do. But I've made an online alternative using a Padlet. But you could do a similar thing with other sort of online collaborative tools. Learners can use the first column to tell you what they already know about a topic. That's the K. They could use the second column to tell you what they wonder or would like to know about a topic. That's the W. And you can then guide reflection by asking learners to return to this chart after engaging with a text or after studying something and tell you what they have learnt about a particular topic. So it's KWL. That obviously provides the teacher with some really, really useful information. It tells you what learners might already know. So especially when teaching exams, but it applies to anything really, it's much better if we can avoid going over lots of stuff that learners already know. If somebody is already knowledgeable about something and other learners aren't, then that's a lovely opportunity for the teacher to step back and enable learners to teach and learn from each other. And that's an affordance of KWL charts. Also, by looking at what learners wonder or want to know about a topic. If you can ask them this before you start planning your lesson, then that provides you with some really useful information about what you could include within your lesson that they will find particularly engaging. So yes, as I said, that applies to pretty much anything, but in particular, that has huge relevance to teaching exams. Okay, I'm not sure how well that particular KWL chart is going to work with several thousand people all at once, so I'd urge you not to go and look at it now. But you'll be able to download these slides or access these slides after the session. But you can then use the QR codes to access it and have a little look and see how that is for learners. Okay, let's move on. Now, learners have thought about the topic. So we've had our little lead in, we've activated some vocabulary. Maybe you've connected it to your own lives as well. Now, the next thing I'd like for us to do is prepare to read. I'm going to give you a text. It's about 150 words, so not a very long one. And I'd like you to answer these 5 questions. Something you could do here is take a photo of the screen, or if you have pen and paper handy, just scribble down the 5 questions. Okay, what type of text? Who wrote it? Who's the audience? What's their relationship? And why was it written? Now, before we look at the text, I want us to think of some ways of approaching this task. Now, you have 5 questions to read from a short text, but you're only going to have 10 seconds to do that. So you're not going to be able to read every word. You're going to have to use a specific kind of reading, skim reading, in order to do this task successfully. That's something that the people on the train might be doing as they sort of look through articles, and they're quickly trying to identify an article that might be of interest for them before they dive into it and start reading it in more detail. Now, something I like to do with learners is, rather than just sort of saying, right, read quickly, or try and do this within this time frame, is to try and break down individual skills and let them see what they actually are. So I'm going to show you some bits of advice, and I just want you to tell me in the chat, is this good advice or is this bad advice for someone who is attempting to skim read a text? Okay. So do you think this is good advice or bad advice? Yes, absolutely. That is good advice. It's helpful to look at the layout of a text. That can help us determine what kind of text it is. It's probably something we do quite subconsciously without thinking. Okay, next bit of advice. Should we read every word carefully? Wow, lots of answers coming through, and yeah, it looks like you agree with me. Okay, so yeah, that's not great advice. Next thing, should we look up unknown words? Is that good advice or bad advice? Yeah, awful advice. Now, we might choose to do that later, but in the moment of skimming, no, that's not a helpful piece of advice. Okay. How about reading the title, headings, pictures, words in italics? Okay, great. Now, that is actually quite a helpful thing to do. There is lots of information, usually packed within the title, headings, and particularly in the starts of paragraphs. In longer texts, the opening paragraph and maybe the closing one might sort of contain a greater overview of the text than some of those in the middle. So it's good for learners to know where they can access lots of useful information. How about this? Yeah, and I think we agree with each other there. That is excellent advice. Let your eyes move quickly over the text. Should we try and understand everything? Yeah, you're bang on again. Yeah, that is not something that's very realistic. So it's not helpful for people to do. That's more likely to make them slow down and try and read and digest every detail. That can be valid, but that's for a different situation. That's a different kind of reading. Okay, and this final bit of advice. Yes, okay, so that is very helpful. Do try and get a general understanding of the text. So, although you're not going to carefully read every word, look up any unknown words and try to understand everything, You are going to consider the layout. Maybe read the title, headings, pictures, words in italics for start of paragraphs. Places where you are likely to find lots of information about the overall text. You are likely to move your eyes quickly over the text, and you're hoping to get a general understanding of it. Okay, so let's just remind ourselves of the task. I gave you 5 questions. Can you remember them? I want you to tell me the type of text, who wrote it, to whom, their relationship, and the reason for the text. What's the purpose of it? Those are the five bits of information. So now I think we're ready. We are going to look at the texts. So remember to use these strategies. Try and answer these 5 questions. You have 10 seconds. Okay, there you go. So just 10 seconds, 5 questions. I'm intrigued as to how much of that you got. So please tell me in the chat, what kind of text do you think it was? Okay, I've got a few people saying letter. Someone said, wow. Email, lots of people saying email. Yeah. Okay. Now, if I were to do this with a smaller group, whether it's in a live classroom, face-to-face classroom, or in a smaller online live session with safe breakout rooms, I might ask learners to individually compare their answers in smaller groups. That creates more opportunities for people to express their ideas, use language and ideas from the text, and to be actively involved. It's always helpful if when discussing answers to a reading, learners can support their ideas with reference to a text. So that's what we're going to try and do here. Now, we can still do that with larger groups, even if people aren't able to turn on their webcams and microphones and chats. There's still ways we can facilitate that. So let me demonstrate. What I would often do is copy and paste my text into a Google Doc. That's a collaborative shared document that can be accessed and simultaneously edited by numerous people. Now, it's not going to quite work with 3,500 people, so I'm just going to show you some pictures of it to demonstrate. But I would share the link with learners just after reading the text. I would ask people to say in the chat what kind of text they thought they'd seen, as we're doing here. And then I would perhaps nominate a learner to go into the Google Doc, which everyone else can see, and to highlight the sections of text that give us that answer, that contain that information. So we can see from the to field, the subject, CC and BCC, from the way it's signed off, from the way it begins. Those are all signs that it is an email. That helps me to understand that the learner is getting information from the right places and that they haven't just had a lucky guess. And that's also really useful inputs for other learners. If they weren't sure exactly where to get this information, they would get that by watching this this method of feedback. Okay, let's look at the next question. So who wrote it? Okay, well, we can see it's from an educator and webinar presenter who is planning a webinar. Okay, and these are the sections of text which tell us that. And who's the audience? Yeah, it's Donia. It's someone who, amongst other things, organizes webinars. But how do we know that? Well, we can get that information from these highlighted areas of the text. So, as you can see, rather than just focusing on what the answer is, when managing feedback, particularly with reading activities, it's really useful to get learners to support their answers with reference to the text. It helps you understand that they are getting information from the right places, and it also supports learning of other students. Okay, now the same process applies for all the other questions here. So why was it written? Okay, that's where that content can be found. It was to organize a webinar. Now, in just 10 seconds, that has helped you to orientate within the text. It's helped you to understand what it is, what it's about, who it's by, why it was written. All of that information is really, really helpful. It helps us to anticipate the content and to make predictions and also make decisions about whether we want to read the text. That's something we do. So sort of when we're able to make decisions, like the people on the train, on the tube with their newspapers. That may not be the case with students who are preparing for an exam. If they're turning to paper 2 of their B1 preliminary reading paper, then they don't have a choice about whether they're reading that text. They've got to read it. However, doing this does enable them to work out where key information can be found, which will allow them to comprehend the text a bit faster and to do other follow-up stages to that task more effectively. Now, in a real class, after using a skill, as we just did, I might ask you to think about, to reflect upon how what you've just done could be applied outside of the classroom. This can help increase the perceived relevance of that skill, as well as help learners recognize situations in which they can use it, which can help and support learner independence. Okay, now we've already started sort of analyzing that task a little bit, but let's continue that. I'd like for us to take another little step back into the teaching room, back into the staff room, sorry, and let's analyze those tasks. So firstly, what was the purpose of all that? Okay, well, with this, in terms of the skimming stage, I wanted to provide learners with a general understanding of the text. I also wanted to provide practice of skimming. So I wanted to develop that skill as well as give learners an insight into the text they've been presented with. Before that, I did some certain things. Okay, so we're going to come to that in a moment. Sorry, I'm getting ahead of myself. I'm getting all overexcited. Okay, so did you skim? Did you skim during that last activity? I would guess that initially, yes, you did. And part of the reason behind you skimming was that you only had 10 seconds to read the text. So through task design, I led you to use and practice the skill that I, as the teacher, wanted to focus you on. Okay, now, how is learning scaffolded? What happens? So right from the beginning of a lesson, we've been building up to that from the beginning of a lesson. So there was a lead in, we got you thinking about the topic, that made you sort of think about some vocabulary that sort of could have occurred within it. You were speaking about that, making connections with your own life, all little things, but things that leave you better able to engage with a text on that topic. We then developed a checklist. We thought about the skills you would need in order to successfully complete that task. And we broke those down into small, manageable chunks. And we created a checklist that you are able to refer to as you did the task. That didn't stop though. That didn't stop after sort of once we'd done the reading. Feedback was a very important stage. I asked you to justify your answers and to show where you got your answers from by highlighting relevant areas of the text. So those are all ways in which learning was scaffolded. Now, this is a big question. What challenges may learners face? Now, I'll let you add your ideas to the chats. We could go off in so many different directions here, so many, but there's one in particular that I'd like to focus on. And that is that, particularly in terms of learning online, it may have been difficult for some of you to actually view the text. It was shared with you via a screen share. So it wasn't particularly easy for you to sort of zoom in, I don't imagine. In the 10 seconds that you had, the resolution might not have been great, and that could have prevented you doing the task at all. So let's think about some ways of dealing with that. Now, we could share the text with learners in advance. We could do that in a format that they're more comfortable using. Speak to your learners, try and find out if there's any sort of specific needs that they have in terms of the presentation of visual material. If they do, then they might be able to guide you as to the best format and the best way for you to share that with them. It's also possible that they're new to learning online, or as new to that as you are to teaching online. So they may not be necessarily aware of some of the tools and opportunities available to them. Now, most browsers and devices have viewing tools that make text easier to read. Now, this is a topic that we could talk about at length. So rather than us going off on that tangent, I would love for you instead to look out for the Future Teacher Talks UK. There's a link at the top of the chat box now. If you're watching a recording of this session, you won't be able to see that. But if you search for Future Teacher Talks UK and check out the session called Strategies to Support Reading from April 2020, then you'll find some excellent practical suggestions there. So do have a look at that when you get a moment, and thank you very, very much to Jamie for sharing that link. That's really helpful. Okay, so what's next? What's next, people? We've experienced a lead in. We've helped prepare learners to read. You've done a skim reading task. But what could come next? What could come next? I'd love to read some of your ideas in the chats. Okay. Okay, so yeah, we've got possibly a further reading task. Someone's writing scanning. analyzing, feedback, reading for details. Yeah, so you're mentioning lots of different reading skills there. You might also have an extension task that would give learners an opportunity to use the ideas and language from the text in a more productive way. You're likely to also have some kind of reflection built in. But let's think about further reading tasks. Let's not get ahead of ourselves, eh? So, in terms of further reading tasks, these are all things that you mentioned. So you might have people scanning for specific details. You could have people reading more intensive reading for detail. You could have people trying to infer attitude and opinion. And of course, you could also have people dealing with unknown vocabulary, unknown words. Again, I can see people in the chat sort of suggesting you could have people focusing on specific grammar or vocabulary. So you could then turn this into more of a language class, using this as a text-based approach to teaching language. However, for now, we're going to go with the assumption that the main aims for this lesson are skills-based. So I'd like to show you one way of doing that. Now, the activity I'm going to show you is one that I use in my face-to-face classroom. I'm sure that you've probably used it too. It's one that involves some fly swats. So if we've worked together before and you've seen me disappearing off to the classroom and I've got lots of fly swats trapped under my arm, then you'll know that I'm probably going to do this activity. And it involves getting students to whack certain words or areas of a text with those fly swats as they're displayed on the board. Okay, now to do this online, you need to copy and paste your text into a collaborative whiteboard. The example you can see here is a Google Jamboard where up to 5 learners can use differently coloured highlighters all at the same time. Now, you probably have more than 5 learners in your class, so you'll need to put them all into groups. Still, get them to take turns, and you can get everybody, as long as you don't have 3,500 people in your class, to have a go at some point and keep everybody actively involved. Their job is to race to highlight or circle a feature of the text that you describe. So here's what that may look like a few minutes into that activity. So you could get learners to try and identify specific words, maybe by giving synonyms, antonyms. You could get learners to race to identify specific features of that text. For example, polite greetings, or maybe functional phrases, trying to find an example of a suggestion or an apology. Another really nice thing that you can do is get learners to race to identify an area of text that you are paraphrasing or summarizing. And that can help focus learners on sections of text rather than just sort of small little word or phrase level chunks. Now, a benefit of doing that is that it can help learners identify, or it helps learners develop a mental map of how information is distributed throughout the text. So it helps them see the layout and the text organization. Now, I think that's a really helpful thing to do. I mean, is useful to do once, but the real value is if you keep doing this. And if you do it with lots of different text types and do it with different examples from the same text types as well. So if you regularly do this activity with different examples of emails, then over time, learners will start to notice common features of emails. For example, look at the first few words of the opening paragraph. Now, that's quite a common way. That's, certainly not all emails will start like that, but that's a fairly common phrase to find within the beginning of an email reply. Now, look at this activity. This is from A2, Key for Schools Reading Part 5. Do you think an understanding of the common features of emails might help learners complete this task? Yes, very, very, very much so. That would sort of specifically help them with the opening here, but in other ways as well. Now, in order to successfully complete this task, learners need to use their understanding and knowledge of grammatical forms, as well as structural relationships to complete the gaps. But there's more to it than that. They'll also need to use some reading skills. They'll need to skim the text to start with to get a general understanding before intensively reading individual sections and paragraphs for detail, and then looking over the whole text again as a final check. There are a few other little stages as well. So those are lots of steps and lots of things for people to remember. And we can help people do that more effectively by breaking them down, breaking these longer tasks, bigger tasks down into steps. Now, this task, which helps prepare learners for A2 Key for Schools Reading Part 5, helps learners create a checklist to refer to as they complete the task. So it's something we can do together. It would encourage learners to collaboratively sort of really think about the best way of approaching a task, and then creating a record that they can refer back to about the best way of approaching the task. So it's a very, very similar process to the way that we prepared learners to read and to do the skimming activity earlier. Now, that was an A2 level lesson. However, the same principles apply across all levels, as you can see from this B1 preliminary for schools reading lesson. So, as I said, whether you're helping learners improve their reading skills in general or focusing on a specific examination, it's always helpful to break things down into smaller steps and to provide learners with checklists that they can refer to and support their practice. Now, if you like the look of this little activity, that's part of a larger lesson plan, and I'll be telling you where you can find that and where you can download it for free at the end of the session. Okay. Now, extension tasks. We spoke about those as well, didn't we? By extension tasks, I'm talking about how can we provide a further, maybe productive opportunity to use some of the ideas or the language contains within the text. So I'm sure you've got lots of good ideas. So I would love for you to share them in the chat. How do you think, how could we give learners some practice of speaking or writing as a follow-up stage? Perhaps if you could suggest some that learners could do collaboratively or that they could do individually as well. Okay, yeah, lovely. Right, I'm going to show you some of my ideas. I think that we might be on the same page. So you could do things like get them to write an email reply. That's something that could be done individually and develop their writing skills. You could get them to script or role play a meeting between Chris and Donia. So that's something with writing. There's some collaboration and also some speaking. You could get them to go and research an event that they might be interested in attending, and then prepared to present and summarize it to other students. So that could give further practice of reading, but also speaking and some collaboration with other learners. That's something that could be done very easily outside of a live lesson. So again, we're thinking about, does this need to happen as part of a live lesson, or could it be done after that? Okay, there are tons of good ideas in here. Okay, people are talking about role plays. Okay, writing reports. Fabulous. Okay. Now, as a final stage in our lesson, we might ask learners to think about reflecting upon what they have done. So please, could you suggest some ways or suggest some things that learners might usefully reflect upon after reading? I'll suggest a few ideas as well. I think that they could usefully reflect upon the text. So it's very easy to get caught up as teachers. It's very easy to get caught up in the task and the skills that we're trying to develop and knowledge and this and that. But from our learner's perspective, they've read a text, and it's really important. Like, how did they feel about it? Did they find it interesting? So, yeah, sorry, I've forgotten all of my words. Yeah, so get them thinking about what it meant for them. You might want to focus them on the skills that they used as well as sort of looking forward and thinking about what might it be useful for them to work on and what they might want to read next as well. Okay. So throughout the session, we've been talking about different kinds of online learning and the fact that sometimes learners might learn within a synchronous live context. Sometimes they might do it asynchronously. And maybe not all of these lesson stages needs to happen as part of our live lesson. So before I share some resources with you that you can use with your learners, I'd just like us to think about the questions that we as teachers should ask ourselves when trying to decide which stages of a lesson we should include within a live component, within the live part of a lesson. I think these are some useful questions. I'll let you have a read through them. I think if your answers to the questions on the left tend to be yes, then that may indicate that the activity or task could be done by learners asynchronously, either before or after a live lesson, or possibly even instead of it. However, if learners need immediate supports or they need to collaborate in real time, then it may be more useful to include it as part of a live lesson. Okay, so I think this is probably the bit that lots of you have been waiting for. Some extra resources to help you and your learners. Okay, so We have a couple of sites here. These have lots of lesson plans and resources for teachers and learners at all levels. Exam boosters are available to download for free and are ideal for home study and exam revision as well. Here you can see some self-access learning materials. They've been designed so that learners can follow them independently. There are tips in every plan, so the learners are encouraged to reflect on their learning and use online tools that can help them develop more autonomously and independently. Okay, now I'd really like to show you the supporting every teacher website. That's rather a good one. Again, thanks to Jamie for sharing the links with you in the chat. Now, this has been set up to help teachers around the world manage the demands of moving their lessons online. So you can access that through the link in the chat or by scanning the QR code with your mobile phone. The site itself looks a little bit like that. And if you scroll down, you'll see something a little bit like this. Now, it has a number of options, one of which is our free webinars, and that's where you can find a whole catalogue of webinars, much like the one that you're participating in now. There's also a support pack for teachers. Let's have a look at that. That contains lots of useful content, advice, and links to extra resources for specific exams, levels, and skills. Okay, and then if you go back to the supporting teachers websites, then you will be able to navigate to the free teaching resources. That's the top left icon. And that's got this lovely little search tool, which allows you to select an exam, a level, and the type of resource that you're looking for. And it will bring up all the content that meets your search criteria. So it saves you having to search through loads of stuff, because believe me, there is bags and bags of stuff on there. This one in particular is a lesson plan. There are lots of lesson plans that have recently been added, and they've been specifically written to provide options for online teachers. As with all Cambridge English lesson plans, they have quite nice, useful aims. They explain the materials that you will need. Lots of these are provided with the plans as well. And then within the actual lesson procedure, you'll see that there are lots of online options suggested. So where we're all working on different platforms, it tries to provide a few different suggestions. So however you're teaching, you should find something useful there. Here are some references, some of the things that I've drawn on while getting today's little talk together. I do hope you found it useful. I must say, I've been absolutely blown away with the response. You've been so sort of productive in the chats. Lots of fabulous ideas there. So thank you for giving up your time. I think we might have Donia around somewhere. Hello, Donia.
Hello, Chris. Thank you very much for such a fantastic, informative webinar. You'll see from all the comments how useful it's been. I think we probably have time for one question only, something that's come up a few times. People have asked, how can teachers encourage their students to read?
Well, that's a great question, Donia. And I would say tapping into learner interests is absolutely essential. Something we constantly talk about is knowing your learners, taking time to find out what they're interested in. So make that a part of your lessons, get them talking about their own interests. You could then try and maybe provide choice within classes. Let them choose which texts you incorporate within your lessons. Of course, we have a very limited time within our classes, so we really need to get them reading as much outside of that. So trying to sort of facilitate sort of student reading or listening clubs can be a really nice way of doing that. Perhaps devoting a little bit of class time so that students can share the things that they've been reading outside of class or listening to, and giving each other some nice recommendations. I think that could be a good approach.
Okay, thank you very much. I think that's all we've got time for, although it looks like a lot of the other questions you answered throughout the webinar. So thank you very much.
Oh, thank you, Donnie, and thank you so much to everyone for coming along and participating.